Hello and welcome to the Underhive. We are back with some more How to Command the Death Guard. In this series, we're going to take a look at every aspect of the Death Guard, so whether you're looking to get more out of your army, or you're thinking of joining Nurgle's feculent festivities, then there's something here for you. In this episode, we're going to take a look at another Wombo combo, the Harbinger's Pox-splosion. So let's take a look at how that goes down. As you may have deduced from the name of the combo, this is reliant on really only two key factors and a bit of CP. The first is Poxwalkers. Of course, the stratagems involved only apply to Poxwalkers, and they turn what is a chaffy and good utility unit, to be fair, it's good for scoring points, holding objectives, but otherwise very cheap and chaffy, it turns that into an absolute melee threat. So first and foremost, Poxwalkers, secondly, Harbingers to get the most out of the combo. Now, you don't have to run your whole army as Harbingers. You could spend the extra CP for, say, a patrol and just take a couple of squads of Poxwalkers. I would argue going up to max squad size of 20 is definitely worthwhile, but you're not always going to be able to fit that in your list. So cramming as many into the squads as you can is at least somewhere close. You could chuck Typhus in that detachment, but that's kind of much of a muchness. He does, of course, buff the strength of Poxwalkers when he's close by the unit, and you can buff them even further with a spell, Putrescent Vitality, taking them up to a maximum Strength 5, Toughness 5, which is a very nice profile for them to go into, particularly light infantry, but even Marines. So Typhus being there isn't a bad thing, but he's not needed to pull off the combo. So the squad of 20 Poxwalkers is the assumption, and they already have access to the stratagem Mutant Strain, which is just a generic stratagem in the Death Guard Codex. It's not linked to any particular plague company. But then you've got the Harbinger's specific stratagem, the Wrathful Dead. So that is going to limit your availability unless you take the Harbinger's detachment, at least for these Poxwalker squads and a HQ. So Mutant Strain allows you to deal mortal wounds in addition for any hit rolls of a 6 made by the Poxwalkers. And the penalty for that is that they take a mortal wound for any 1s rolled to hit. So it is a bit of a trade-off on its own, but it's not a terrible thing in just any given list. I did have it backfire in a recent game. There were a couple of Terminators left, and I had, I think, 9 Poxwalkers or so, and I managed to roll 7 1s and I think 2 or 3 6s. So the odds were obviously not in my favour there. The squad got wiped, and he did lose me control of the objective and ultimately factored into the loss of the game, I believe. So it can backfire when you're just using Mutant Strain on its own. But the Wrathful Dead stratagem is giving you full rerolls to hit. So the 1s that you roll originally, you're going to be re-rolling, hopefully into less 1s, but it gives you the option of re-rolling everything that isn't a 6, so you can really lean into the mortal wounds, even at the risk that it's going to harm the Poxwalkers. So if we assume a squad of 20 is going to have 40 attacks, 2 attacks each, and they're all in range to attack. So 40 attacks, on average, we would expect 6 mortal wounds dealt to the opponent and 6 mortal wounds dealt to the Poxwalkers. Now, there are armies out there that will have feel no pains, whether they are innately or whether they are from an ability. But abilities that give a feel no pain, whether it's just against mortals or whether it's generally, are a fairly common pick, because mortal wounds are a great source of damage against a variety of armies, particularly the tougher armies in the game, like Astartes with their Armour of Contempt and generally good saves anyway. They are and reasonable toughness on most units, so they are otherwise hard to chip through, but mortal wounds typically go straight through the average Astartes. So aside from those factions that have mortal wound defense, this is going straight through. The full rerolls change that. One other thing I was supposed to mention there, the Poxwalkers do have a 6-up feel no pain. So whilst their lack of save and only feel no pain isn't terribly good at keeping them alive against even moderate firepower, it does at least give them a defense against their own mutant strain damage. And if you can save 1 or 2 of your Poxwalkers from that, that could be the difference between the squad remaining alive or being wiped. And of course, at least if it's alive, you can spend a CP to regenerate some models in your next command phase. The Wrathful Dead changes the odds very nicely. So if we assume that you're going to re-roll everything that isn't a 6 to hit, so on your first batch, on average, you'll get 6 sixes. So your next set of dice, you're going to be rolling 34 dice again. You have re-rolled all the ones from your first batch, so they didn't cause you any harm. So of the remaining dice, so 5 out of the 6 dice you originally rolled are being re-rolled, and 1 out of 6 of the results will be a 6 on average. So we would expect a further 5 out of 36 chance to deal mortal wounds, taking us to a total 11 out of 36 chance to deal mortals to the enemy. And when we're making more than 36 attacks, it's fairly expectant to work out that way. Obviously, dice game, it can always go badly for you. It can always go brilliantly for you. So 11, maybe 12 mortal wounds is what you would expect on average from a Wrathful Dead roll where you are re-rolling everything except the 6s. But not only that, it does mitigate your chances of rolling 1s slightly, reducing that to a 5 out of 36, down from a 1 in 6, which would be 6 out of 36. So it's not too much of a mitigation in terms of what the Poxwalkers will take themselves, but almost doubling that mortal wound output is massive. Especially given that, 11 mortal wounds is enough to wipe out some HQ characters, like 9 wound characters. It's also enough to nearly take out the likes of a Redemptor Dreadnought, a very common model in Space Marine armies. It's fantastic as a breakpoint. 10 plus mortal wounds from 2 CP expenditure is phenomenal. We're talking 2 uses of the Plague Skull of Glyphilla. If I could have 2 uses of it, I would take 2 uses of it every day of the week. So having this in the back pocket, if you're planning to take a Harbinger's detachment, is phenomenal. Now, your opponent doesn't necessarily need to engage with the Poxwalkers, particularly if they're in your back line, holding your back objectives, spreading the sickness once a turn to accrue those victory points. But it is part of the game to stop you doing that. And if your opponent just leaves them on back objectives the whole game, you're not going to have a terribly difficult job scoring the primary of at least hold 2, if not hold 3 and more. So it plays the game very well in that these units are otherwise not very expensive. If the scenario doesn't come up, all you've done is perhaps waste your detachment selection, which isn't that big of a detriment. It might have limited your option of a relic you wanted to take or a stratagem that would otherwise be useful, like for the 2nd and 3rd Plague Company. They can be very, very useful in a game. But aside from limiting you in that way, and as we've said, you can pay the extra CP for a separate detachment if you're worried about that. Aside from that, it's not a terrible disadvantage if you don't get the option to use this. Unlike, say, and I know I was probably harder on it than it deserved, but unlike, say, the Contemptor Dreadnought Volkite Volley combo, that's it is dependent on getting line of sight. If your opponent can play around it, there are armies that can just play around your line of sight and move wherever you're not going to be able to see them, or at least as few units as possible. This, on the other hand, doesn't really have a downside. If you've got those units there doing what they're otherwise designed to do, being chaff and being utility to score points, great. You can still win the game even without this combo pulling off. But if they do send something important in there, whether it be an elite infantry unit or a character or maybe both, you can put the hurt back on them with a unit that by right shouldn't be able to do that. I mean, 11 mortal wounds is enough to wipe out, like a 10-man squad of Xenos. It'll take a good chunk out of a Marine squad. It will kill a squad of 5 men, standard infantry for Marines. It will kill most characters. Certainly anything under the 10 wound, character protection. It will deal a good amount of wounds against monsters and vehicles. There's really nothing that wants to be in the position to take that full 20 squad to the face. And the only major downside there is that, of course, they could chip the Poxwalkers off before that happens. But in doing so, as we've touched on in other videos, They give you the opportunity to regen those Poxwalkers at the beginning of your command phase or end of your command phase, whichever it is, for 1 CP. And they can go in front of the existing unit to essentially generate additional movement and make a charge into that enemy model that bit much more likely. And when that comes out of the blue, obviously, I'm not suggesting be unsportsmanly, warn your opponent you're capable of that. But if it comes up and your opponent gives you the opportunity to do it, by rights, you should do it. And when it comes off that you get that charge, maybe it was a squad of 20, got chipped down to 8, you got 5 models back, you're up to 13 models, that's still 26 attacks. So, 1/3 of those nearly. We're talking 8, maybe 9 mortal wounds on average, and perhaps 5, 6 dealt to yourself. That's still going to be a great trade into pretty much any enemy unit, and that's really their job done. If they're the ones taking the fire and they're the ones dealing out the mortal wounds and getting rid of key threats, you've still got 1,800 or maybe a bit less than that, depending on how many squads of Poxwalkers you take. But you've still got 1,700-1,800 points of an army that can be getting on with something else. So if your opponent focuses on the rest of your army, they're letting these guys just score points, which is fine. And if they do come and engage with them, the Poxwalkers can absolutely shut down anything that leaves them alive. So for me, whilst it's not necessarily the sort of thing that will come up every game, even if you're playing to allow it to, when it does, it's very potent. And when it doesn't, it isn't taken away from your game plan. So particularly if you are new to the game, I would certainly encourage taking some larger squads of Poxwalkers, try and keep them out of line of sight where you can, squeeze the points out of them where you can, and even if you're not running Harbingers, just keep Mutant Strain in the back of your mind, because it can turn the tide, and even if you lose the models yourself, I mean, like even in that bad scenario I had, where they killed far more of themselves than they dished out in mortal wounds, they still killed a Terminator. I think I got 3 mortal wounds, so they still killed a Terminator, which they would never have done on their own. 22 or 24 attacks or whatever it would have been with a 2-up save, they're just not that likely to even kill 1 Terminator. So I was still happy with the result, even though it ultimately went badly. So for me, there isn't that much of a downside, and there's a hell of an upside. So I thought it was worth mentioning, even though there's nothing particularly wild or out there about this combo, and it isn't that big of an investment for the army. I certainly wouldn't suggest this makes your army a skew list. Well, not unless you're taking several detachments and like 6 squads of Poxwalkers, maybe then. But either way around, I hope you're enjoying the series. If you are, I'd really appreciate it if you get involved. For those of you that have stuck around to the end, we are fast approaching 1,000 subs now. I was kind of hoping that Darktide would be out around the time I hit 1,000. We could play some Darktide, maybe give a copy of the game away as a celebration, because I do want to give something back, because without all of yourselves being here, I wouldn't be in the position to hit 1,000 anyway. So I really appreciate that. If you're not already a sub, if you consider doing that, I'd really appreciate it. It will get us one step closer to that giveaway. Given that Darktide has been delayed now, I think, to the end of the year, chances are I'm hoping to hit 1,000 before that. So we'll have to look at something else. So keep it in mind. There will be a giveaway. If there's something that you think would be a good suggestion, feel free to let me know. I will probably put a post or a video up a bit nearer the time to just get a feel for what people think is a valuable giveaway. Most likely going to be some form of Death Guard models, whether it be a patrol box or something like that. But we'll see a bit nearer the time. I just wanted to let you all know that is something I'm looking at doing, and hopefully that feels like a nice compensation for being part of the community and helping me get to 1,000 subs. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Really do appreciate it. If you've got anything to add to the conversation, please do put it in the comments. As you will have seen, I always read them, and I will get back to you if there's anything for me to add there to the conversation. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time in the Underhive.